you put up as the greatest bodybuilders of all time?
Sergio.
I really love Sergio.
Nobody's been born with that type of configuration.
People that stand out to be like, wow, this is Mr. Olympia at the time.
Sergio in his time.
It's like something from another planet.
He didn't do anything right, and he still looked like that.
No one ever in the sport ever dealt with what my dad dealt with.
Sergio could not believe Arnold beat him.
He didn't deserve it. Sergio should have won.
He was like really pissed off about
He
it.
was mad at himself for letting him get screwed back in the day.
And it was just really bad blood between Sergio and Joe Weider.
And a lot of people look back throughout history and say Joe Weider was a little racist. Maybe he had it in for Sergio.
No matter what, I will be forever the myth.
So crazy is that my dad didn't even know he was shot.
This is the story of Sergio The Myth Oliva.
Imagine you were born in a poor family, in a poor city, in a poor country. What do? You make your dreams come true.
Sergio Oliva was born on 4th of July 1941 in Pinar del Rio, Cuba, a small town about 100 miles from Havana, renowned for producing the finest cigars. Despite being born into poverty, Sergio's parents were incredibly strong, working hard to support and feed him along with his 20 brothers and sisters. At just 12 years old, while other kids his age were playing and having fun, Sergio was already working alongside his father in the sugarcane fields of Guanabacoa. A year later, he took on the tough job of collecting rubbish, chicken bones, newspapers, and glass bottles to support his family, selling whatever he could find. At just 15 years old, his father decided it was time for Sergio to join the army of Fulgencio Batista, Cuba's leader at the time. The army obviously had an age requirement of 18, but Sergio was already tall and strong, without any birth certificate to prove his age. The recruiting officer believed his father's words and allowed him to enlist. His time in the army helped him build incredible strength and endurance. As a teenager, he had to walk for miles through the rough mountains of his country with barely any food, water, or rest. He even took a bullet to the arm, leaving a large scar in his right hand. Sergio quickly liked the military life, thinking he might spend his entire life as a soldier. He remembered, under Batista, Cuba was a paradise. We had beautiful beaches, the best nightclubs, and people came from all over the world. Cuba was connected to every country on earth. But life had other plans. When Fidel Castro's movement overthrew Batista's government in 1959, Cuba changed overnight, and Sergio lost his job in the army. With nothing to do, he spent his days on the beaches of Cuba, dreaming of a life far away from his homeland. One day, he planned to escape Cuba to Miami in a tiny boat with his friends. But at the last minute, when the boat arrived, he cancelled the trip. He said,
I wanted to escape, but number one in the boat, it was too risky. Too many shots. I scared them. If you throw them a punch, they're going to eat my arms. If you're trying to kick it, they're going to eat my leg. And if you're trying to swim, and nobody swims faster than the shot, right? So you're dead anyway, you know? So I say, gotta be a better way.
At that time, Sergio was not involved in sports. He was strong from a lifetime of hard work, and sports were nothing but luxury he could never afford. On a sunny day, as he was laying on the beach with his friends, a member of the Communist Party walked by and kept coming back. Frustrated, Sergio stood up and said, "What are you looking at? There are no women in here." Then he found out that the man was the manager of the Cuban weightlifting team, and he was watching his physique. After a brief chat, he handed Sergio a card and invited him to train at a local weightlifting club. The next day, Sergio went to the gym. He was told to lift an Olympic bar with two 45-pound plates on each side. Sergio lifted it with ease over his head. The coach was ecstatic, shouting, "I found it! I found it." Sergio thought the man was a bit crazy, but the coach saw something in him that Sergio had never realized yet. Within just 3 months, Sergio was lifting weights that others had struggled to lift for years. And his first amateur competition in Havana, Sergio did not just compete, he shattered the records. On his first lift, he broke the new record. On his second, he set a new one. And on his third lift, he broke his own record yet again. From that day on, Sergio knew his passion and realized it was his only way out of the country.
I tried the boxing, the running, the wrestling. I try everything. I play baseball, but those guys in Cuba, mean. No break. The only break I got, it was through the weight.
In 1962, Sergio had a plan to defect to the United States during the Pan American Games in Kingston, Jamaica. He was the captain of a Cuban weightlifting team, but nobody knew his plan. Under Castro's regime, no one trusted anyone. Everyone was scared of everyone else. Despite the danger, the 21 years old Sergio kept his plan to himself, sharing it only with his father. His father's words still echoed in his mind. If you have the chance to go, don't look back. If they catch you, you know what will happen. And Sergio knew he might never see his father again, but yet he was determined to leave. At the day of the competition, he finally located the US Embassy, and he realized it was now or never. He started jogging, telling everyone he was just warming up, but suddenly he took off running faster and faster, like a deer escaping a hunter.
Oh, he runs like a rabbit, right?
And
he's fast, right?
and
They're chasing him.
Armed guards chasing him down the street. It was crazy.
He only wore shorts, a cap, and no shoes. As he ran, he saw a crowd behind him, and panic set in. He thought it was the secret police. If caught, Sergio faced like 30 years in jail, or even the firing squad. But as he sprinted, he realized the people chasing him were not the secret police. They were 65 members of the Cuban delegation, fellow athletes, and even some of Castro's special police. They all wanted freedom too. As Sergio approached the embassy, 2 Marines stood at the entrance. Without slowing down, he jumped over the wheelbarrow of mangoes and leaped a large fence. Inside, everyone was shouting and hugging. Even Castro's secret police were celebrating. The American officials quickly realized the gravity of the situation. They called Washington, and soon after, a small plane arrived to take them all to Miami, Florida, where they received a political asylum. And just like that, Sergio's dream came true. He left behind a life of uncertainty for a fresh start and a chance at the American dream.
I'm not rich, but I feel like $1 million.
When Sergio arrived in America, life was anything but simple. He was working as a TV repairman. He couldn't do much. Sergio knew he had to avoid Florida, where many members of the Cuban community lived. Despite the chaos, Sergio had his sights set on one thing: a fresh start. He always wanted to work and have the good things that the American people had. When asked where he wanted to go, Sergio gave a surprising answer: Chicago. Those around him were shocked. They couldn't understand why he would choose such a cold place to go. Snow and history of gangsters. But Sergio made up his mind, and he simply liked the sound of Chicago. In 1963, Sergio moved to Chicago, a city that would become his home for the next 45 years. He had opportunities to move anywhere else, even to become a citizen of Australia, but he refused. When asked about what he loved about the city, Sergio's face lit up and he said, everything. The people, the food, the nightlife. You can eat Greek, Italian, Chinese, and Cuban. You can go dancing every night if you want. Chicago has it all. Despite the city's notorious past, Sergio found nothing but welcome arms. He started off working long hours in a steel mill plant, continuing his exercise program. He joined the Duncan YMCA. One day, he crossed paths with Mr. America, Bob Gaida, who took Sergio under his wing and showed him how to train like a bodybuilder.
And Bob was a really good bodybuilder, but he also knew a lot about training, about kinesiology and stuff. And he took Sergio under his wing and he helped him get into bodybuilding.
It was there, in that bustling gym, that Sergio's journey into bodybuilding truly began. He decided to leave weightlifting behind and fully commit to bodybuilding, a sport that has been banned by Cuba's communist government. In 1962, Sergio began competing in Amateur Athletic Union, and he was placing really low. He lost the Mr. Chicago title in his first year of competition, and he was losing to the bodybuilders who were not even close to his physique. It was a strange time for a strange organization in a strange sport.
And I think it might have been a little prejudice. They never let black guys win back then in the 60s. Really?
There were 2 competing factions fighting for bodybuilding supremacy: the ultra-conservative AAU and International Federation of Bodybuilding. In those days, black-skinned competitors were often bypassed by the white ones, and also the AAU's Mr. America contests were run like male beauty pageants. Contestants were interviewed and judged on diction, vocabulary, knowledge of world events, and grooming. Athletic points were awarded and counted heavily. Sergio came back in 1964 and won the Mr. Chicago, but was continuously denied the coveted Mr. America title. In 1966, he was allowed to win the most muscular award, but the overall award was still out of reach. There was no way on earth that the AAU was going to allow him to win. Never.
No one ever in the sport ever dealt with what my dad dealt with, and they never will. I've heard him talk to other people where, certain judges and certain people told him no black person or Jew will ever win. I can't imagine after hearing so much hateful stuff, after a while, it's eventually going to turn you into a different person.
Finally, Sergio decided to switch over to the IFBB and try his luck there. The readers were more than happy to give the young man a place to compete and be judged strictly on muscles. And who cares if you're black or you don't speak English? In preparation for the Mr. Olympia appearance, he was able to push his body weight up from 215 to 228 in just 6 weeks period. Sergio quickly won the 1966 Mr. World title and then took 4th place in the brand new Mr. Olympia contest that was won for the 2nd year by Larry Scott.
He made so much improvement from 1966 to 67.
The funny thing is, I wonder what drug Sergio used back then. It was probably like almost nothing, I bet.
I'm sure they were using Dianabol. That was the most popular drug, and Decadrobalin, whatever basic stuff they had back then.
I bet you Sergio was essentially natural probably, even compared to Arnold and those other guys.
After that, Sergio easily won the 1967 IFBB Mr. Universe title, and now he was ready to win his first Olympia title. When Sergio entered the 1967 Mr. Olympia contest in New York, the crowd were outstanding. Harold Pooley, second to Larry Scott the previous 2 years, was relegated to the runner-up spot again. Even the rugged Chuck Sipes had no chance against him. He won his first Mr. Olympia title at just 26 years old. The world of bodybuilding has found its new king.
He went from last place in the Olympia to winning the Olympia, $1,000, and he was happy to get it. I mean, that was big money for him back then.
Yeah.
Sergio was soon known as the Myth because of his crazy genetics. He was getting bigger and bigger at a rapid pace. His body transformations were unreal, especially for a man who never dieted or used a proper training program. He was a freak, a real freak, that even Larry Scott was afraid to go up against him.
Who are your Mount Rushmore? Who do you put up there as the greatest bodybuilders of all time?
Sergio.
Sergio.
I really love Sergio.
But Sergio Oliva's on a whole nother planet.
People that stand out to be like, wow, this is Mr. Olympia at the time.
Sergio in his time.
It's like something from another planet at that time.
Nobody looked like nobody could even think about looking like that.
Sergio had no weak body parts. He had everything.
Nobody's been born with that type of configuration.
He had the chest, back, shoulders, traps. He had forearms. He had calves, thighs. His legs were huge for back then in the 60s. Probably some of the best genetics to this day.
He was the most genetically gifted.
I would think so, yeah.
Wow.
He was that crazy built, maybe so crazy that he did not care about showmanship. He was the man. Who could beat that? Sergio's physique was so dominant that in 1968 he won his second Mr. Olympia title without any competition. No other bodybuilder dared to stand on a stage next to the Myth.
They were afraid to come to the stage. They give me all the trophy.
Chuck Sipes didn't go in it. Harold Poole didn't go in it. Wow. No one dared to go up against him because they could see he was such a freak.
And it felt like no one can take him down. But a determined newcomer from Austria had just arrived in America, ready to challenge the sport's biggest names.
Joe was in love with Arnold. He got the best prize in the world when he got Arnold.
He always would say, Arnold, I want you to be the best and the smartest bodybuilder of the whole world.
But Sergio was a really, really hard worker. He was a working man's bodybuilder. He would work all day. He never was a sponsored athlete.
While Arnold arrived in the US with a salary, a car, a house, and a role at the Hercules movie, spending his time training and posing for the Weeders magazine, Sergio faced a different reality. He was spending 10 to 14 hours a day working in the foundry, which was an intense place, hot and tough, with temperatures reaching 120 degrees, pouring and shaping metal, sweating every ounce of energy. After work, Sergio didn't rest. Instead, he headed straight to the Duncan YMCA, where he trained for another 3 hours. His evenings were spent in English classes. His only breaks were on weekends, which he filled with dancing or occasional movie, finding joy in the simple pleasures of life.
Time to go to dance.
Once he began earning good money, Sergio moved to his own place. He got out of the steel mill and went to work in a brutal Chicago stockyard. He worked long and hard and eventually became a butcher.
But he would actually wear butcher overalls. That's what he was wearing when he was pumping up, and it would have blood on it and everything.
Oh, really?
In 1969, after a year of solid training in the US, Arnold Schwarzenegger earned the IFBB Mr. Universe title to avenge his embarrassing loss to Frank Zane. Arnold was tanned, ripped, and ready. He easily won the Mr. Universe contest before deciding to take on Sergio in the Mr. Olympia contest that same night. Arnold and Franco freaked out backstage when Oliva stripped off his famous butcher's uniform to reveal the freakiest body they had ever seen, with Franco saying, "Must have been lighting," but Arnold knew better. In the book, The Education of a Bodybuilder, Arnold tells of their story encounter. Then for the first time I saw Sergio Oliva in person. I understood why they called him the Myth. It was as jarring as if I'd walked into a wall. He destroyed me. He was so huge and so fantastic, there was no way I could have thought of beating him. I admitted my defeat and felt some of my pump go away. I never liked to admit defeat, but I thought Sergio was better. There were no two ways about it. That night, Sergio claimed his third Olympia title, unaware that it would be his last.
I gave him a big kiss on stage and I said enjoy it because this is the last time.
In order to understand his opponent better, Arnold traveled to Chicago to train with the newly married Sergio.
And he stayed with him. He stayed with him at his house, with him and his wife. He trained with him at the Duncan YMCA because he wanted to know what Sergio was all about. He wanted to learn about this guy.
Arnold was amazed at how strong Sergio was and how hard he worked.
He would do like 5 sets of triple sets, bench press, chin-ups, and then bent over rowing. He would just go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, without stopping. He wouldn't stop. And he would do 5 sets like that. And then he says, okay, now let's start training. And he would not count those sets. It was the crazy things. I said, wait a minute, you don't count that? That's 25 sets. This is, baby, come on, let's go.
Back in the day, these guys had to figure out a leg curl worked your hamstrings, pull downs worked your lats. Like, there was no book for them to open and be like, oh, I want to work on this here. These are the exercises I should do.
And what's even more incredible is that Sergio developed a raging metabolism that allowed him to ingest tons of indiscriminate calories, yet stay lean. One of his supervisors at work said that Sergio was eating 2 packs of Hostess Twinkies and 2 bottles of Mountain Dew for lunch.
He didn't do anything right, and he still looked like that.
Because if you think about Sergio had incredible charisma. Anybody who knew him back then, this guy was like Arnold. He was very cocky, he was very arrogant, he was a great dresser.
The Myth was the most stylish bodybuilder ever. His outfits were just as bold and eye-catching as he was. He often wore high-waisted, flared white pants with stylish shoes. His shirts had to be specially made with slits in the sleeves to fit his huge 21-inch arms. Sergio liked to wear a lot of gold jewelry, including several bracelets, necklaces, and a large gold medallion that became his signature piece.
He was a sharp dresser. He was a good-looking guy.
I used to see him in Chicago, and he would come with these high-waisted white pants with the bell bottoms, white shoes.
And he's always got a hat on, and the guns just busting out of the shirt.
And he just looked like a really rough guy. He had scars on his face.
And he had the extrovert personality. Always very popular with females.
He had this big gold medallion. Mr. T copied off of Sergio.
I love that picture of him standing there with the pool stick.
I mean, he was such a character. He was just amazing. He was an amazing physique, and he was one of a kind.
In 1970, politics took a turn when Joe and Jim Lorimer tricked Sergio into competing at the Mr. World contest by saying Arnold wouldn't show up. Sergio lost. He wasn't prepared for Arnold. He still had 2 weeks until the Olympia. It was the perfect opportunity for Joe to show that the seemingly unbeatable Sergio could be defeated.
So they got Sergio to go into the contest. Sergio said he did not know Arnold was going in that contest. From what I heard, the lighting at that contest was really bright, and Sergio had one problem. He used to put a lot of oil on his body, and he looked smoother than he was. He wasn't very disciplined when it came to posing. Like, he would hit an upper body shot and he would leave his legs unflexed, or he would pose too fast. He wasn't really a great poser. Where Arnold really perfected his posing. He made sure every pose he did was technically perfect. And Arnold ended up beating Sergio, and Sergio was shocked. Sergio could not believe Arnold beat him. And after the contest, what happened back then was all the guys would go out together and eat. There was no rivalries. They were all friends. So all the bodybuilders go out to a restaurant and they're eating. And Sergio goes up to Arnold and he says, I can't believe you beat me tonight. Well, Arnold tells him, he goes, Sergio, if you would have been about 8 pounds heavier, I never would have been able to beat you. Of course, Sergio goes back to Chicago and he does what? He eats more.
Yeah.
He tries to get bigger.
2 weeks later at the Olympia, Sergio and Arnold had to face each other again in New York City. The contest was very close.
The New York fans were big Sergio fans. Arnold comes out, he gets good applause, but then Sergio comes out, the place goes crazy. Sergio looked amazing that night. He was huge, but he was a little too smooth.
During the posing round, after posing for hours, Arnold tricked Sergio by saying that he is tired and suggested to go backstage.
I then put a little trick on him. We were doing pose-off after pose-off, and then I said to him, I think it's enough. I think that they must know by now who is going to be the winner, and this is your right. And then he walked off, and I pointed at him like he's giving up.
The judges saw Sergio leaving and gave the win to Arnold.
He turned around, he said, "You son of a bitch." I mean, he was like really pissed off about it.
But this was not enough. The following year, Oliva was banned from the 1971 Olympia for competing in a rival federation event, the 1971 NABA Mr. Universe. This was extremely controversial because Arnold had competed for that very same contest the year before.
And they didn't make the rule until after he competed in another federation, which everybody was doing.
Sergio was not an insider in the IFBB. He entered contests based on the information that he had at the time. Obviously, if he would have known that he would be banned from competing at the Olympia, he wouldn't have had entered the other contests. Here's another funny thing. They made Sergio guest post at that same Olympia, but they didn't allow him to compete. It was hilarious.
A week later, they have the Mr. Olympia in Paris, France. Sergio actually comes over to Paris. They tell him, Sergio, you can't compete.
So what does that mean? You lose all these tickets from people coming to see my dad. So what do the leaders do? They make my dad a guest poser at the Olympia.
But they wouldn't let him go up against
Oh, really? That's weird, yeah.
Oh, it's so stupid, I know.
It's a really testament of how smart the leaders were.
And without Sergio to challenge him, Arnold won the 1971 Mr. Olympia without any competition, since he was the only participant. After this setback, Oliva was determined to take his revenge and beat Schwarzenegger under the high-intensity training hit of Arthur Jones. Sergio challenged Schwarzenegger of the 1972 Olympia in Essen, Germany, and it was one of the sport's most memorable showdowns ever.
Here's what happened. They go to the prejudging. They don't have a theater for the prejudging. They have to do the prejudging in another building. So it's not on stage. They're actually standing against a wall in a regular room.
In a sneaky move, Arnold suggested that the stage be set in a darker room to make Sergio's skin blend in.
Arnold's white, Sergio's black. He figured he would stand out more against the wall.
Arnold wasn't in his best shape. He didn't bring the best conditioning and had a poor performance, while Sergio, by all counts, was in his all-time greatest shape and was completely confident he would regain the Mr. Olympia title at a reportedly super ripped 250 pounds.
Sergio goes in looking unbelievable. This is the best he's ever looked in his career. Still got that tiny weight, huge, bigger than ever, but now he's ripped.
He was bigger and had better legs. His tiny waist was contrasted with the incredible mass and thickness in his full muscle bellies. His muscle definition and overall conditioning were better than Arnold's. 3 judges had Sergio in first place, with only 1 judge's vote for Arnold, but Joe Weider switched the judges at the last minute, and Arnold was declared the winner in what is to this day the most controversial bodybuilding contest of all time.
He didn't deserve it. Sergio should have won. They gave it to him because it was in Germany.
Every bodybuilder who was there, all the guys that were there, they all said Sergio should have won. That was a really, really controversial Mr. Olympia. Even Arnold in his book said if he was a judge, he probably would have put Sergio in first.
After this, Sergio cut all ties with the IFBB when he continued to compete for rival federations, and by the 1973, his rivalry with Arnold came to an end. It all reached a boiling point after the famous incident of Tijuana at Mr. International.
There was a contest called the Mr. International contest that used to be held in Tijuana, Mexico every year. And all the bodybuilders would go there. And one of the reasons the bodybuilders would go, of course, was to get their drugs from Tijuana.
Oh, shit.
Arnold and Joe Weider were in the audience when Oliva challenged Schwarzenegger to come on stage with him to see who was the best built man in the world. He wanted a showdown on a more neutral ground.
He goes, come on up on stage and pose down against me.
Weider quickly advised Arnold to stay in his seat and ignore the challenge by Sergio.
So Arnold never ended up going on stage, but eventually Franco Colombo ended up accepting Sergio's invitation. Franco got on stage and competed against him.
The IFBB was so angry with Oliva's defiant attitude, shortly after the contest they decided to suspend him again from the 1973 Olympia.
Anyways, after that, Sergio had just ruined it with Weider. Weider wrote these really bad articles in the magazine.
Here's the article. It says, Sergio Oliva, a chicken without a head, by Joe Weider. But that's page 1. On page 2, he goes full-blown commando. He's using the words whore and hooker.
And it was just really bad blood between Sergio and Joe Weider.
And a lot of people look back throughout history and say, well, you know, maybe Joe Weider was a little racist, maybe he had it in for Sergio, and maybe he put these rules in place specifically to prevent Arnold from being beaten by Sergio, and he wanted to hold Sergio back from winning all these Olympias. And there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there that believe that was the case.
3 weeks later, the Mr. Olympia contest takes place in New York City. Arnold wins, but what's important about that contest was pumping iron, which came out 1 year later. Now, if Sergio would have been in that contest, who knows? I mean, Sergio could have got some great publicity.
Sure.
Maybe Sergio would have been in the movie Pumping Iron.
Yeah.
After this, Sergio walked away from the IFBB and he continued to compete in lesser-known organizations like WBBG, where he held a knockoff contest called the Mr. Olympus, which Sergio won easily several times.
When Sergio came over to the WBBG, it was a big deal in bodybuilding history. You know, a 3-time Mr. Olympia, basically one of the IFBB's best bodybuilders to come over to another organization and start competing for them.
Sergio would often show up smooth for these contests, but he would always win. The challenge of competing against Arnold was gone, and Sergio didn't have the motivation to train hard like he did when he was competing for the Mr. Olympia.
I think deep down he was mad at himself for letting him get screwed back in the day, and then watching someone he knew that he was better than go on to have greatest career ever. I mean, even the stories, Arnold even jokes about it, there's stories of Arnold tricking my dad on stage and, him getting him to move the competition to a different room. And I think a big part of it is my dad was mad at himself for letting all this happen to him.
Well, that's life.
In 1976, while Arnold Schwarzenegger pursued a career in Hollywood, Sergio Oliva chose a different path and became a police officer in Chicago, something he had always dreamed of doing.
I had the opportunity to join in the department. I like it because every day is something different. And I feel myself helping a lot of different people with a lot of trouble. I know I've been helping a lot.
He was not a special or class 2 cop like Ronnie Coleman, but a regular one. He worked in the Rogers Park neighborhood for more than 25 years.
And it's up to you. You will come with me no matter what. When I say you come with me, you come with me. So it's up to you. You're coming along. No, I had to take you.
In 1984, Joe Weider and Wayne DeMiglia made an agreement with Sergio to return to the IFBB by entering the Mr. Olympia contest again after 12 years.
And the return of the myth, Sergio Oliva, last won the title in 1969.
Even at 43 years old and past his peak, Sergio still looked incredible on stage with his small waist and huge arms, finishing in a very controversial 8th place. Most bodybuilding experts and media at the time felt that he should have placed in the top 5.
Contestant number 1, Sergio Oliva.
Sergio, who was famously known for his fiery temper and blunt honesty, seems ready to leave the stage, but then his wife Arlene handed him their newborn son, Sergio Jr. Holding his baby in his arms, Sergio walked to the microphone to speak to his fans.
The place that I took tonight, it doesn't matter 8, 9, 1, 17, 20, no matter what, I will be forever the myth. This, what I have in my hand, it is 9 pounds, 14 ounces, a baby boy, perhaps the next myth.
I never met the bodybuilder. Literally the pictures where he's holding me up, that's literally his second to last show he ever did. So about the time I'm born, he's pretty much done with his career. So I only knew the cop.
A year later, Oliva returned to the Mr. Olympia for one last time where again he placed 8th and Lee Haney took home his second consecutive title. Knee problems prevented him from training his legs heavy and his mythical body was starting to show signs of aging. The Myth had planned on a 1986 Olympia appearance. However, an unfortunate domestic incident ended his bodybuilding career. During an argument with his wife Arlene, Sergio was shot 5 times in the stomach with a .38 revolver.
What's so crazy is that my dad didn't even know he was shot. You know, he thought that she missed.
And despite his life-threatening wounds, Sergio got into his car and drove himself to the hospital. He was hospitalized in serious condition, and he miraculously survived from several bullets, including one that came previously closer to his liver. Later, his wife claimed it was a self-defense, as Sergio was coming after her. In 1995, Sergio was honored by Joe Weider on stage with all 9 Mr. Olympia winners in an iconic moment. The funny thing is, even in retirement, Sergio still stood out, looking better than everyone else on stage.
When he was at his peak, he was unbelievable. I remember one day we met in Chicago and I invited him to a very sophisticated restaurant, and he had to wear a shirt and a tie, and sure enough, Sergio came in with tank top and with his medals in front of him. And I thought it was going to throw all of us out. But not Sergio. And they looked at him, the maitre d' didn't say a word. The place was quiet. They just stared and stared at him. He was absolutely a wonderful, fabulous sight you can imagine.
I won't say much. Joe already said it all. God bless her all.
Jim Mannion went up to my dad and, he went to shake his hand, and he's clearly trying to squash any grudges that they've had for 40 years. And he goes to shake his hand. He's like, "Hey, the Myth." And my dad totally disses him. He pretty much did one of the, moves his hand. Did that in front of everybody.
Said something, Arnold.
I think.
Thank you.
In 2003, Sergio retired from Chicago Police Department, but unfortunately, the last few years of his life were not easy. He had 17 surgeries throughout his body. Surgeries on knees, toes, elbows, rear deltoids, and shoulder joints. He was in a bad car accident years ago, and then caught a staph infection while still recovering in the hospital. He had lost a lot of weight due to kidney failure and needed dialysis 3 times a week. He moved very slowly and felt embarrassed by how he looked. Sergio was to sadly pass away on November 12, 2012.
We really lost some great opportunities to see Arnold and Sergio compete against each other more. It would have really been great if Sergio would have beat Arnold in 72.
We will always remember Sergio for who he was and what he stood for. During his career, he won 21st place bodybuilding title, and he was the first non-white athlete to win Mr. America, Mr. World, Mr. International, Mr. Universe, and Mr. Olympia. Through all of the ups and downs, Sergio never stopped fighting. No matter how many come and go, Sergio will always be the Myth. May he rest in peace.
No matter what, I will be forever the Myth.